Let them die. General Thomas Whitaker said those three words quietly, calmly, the way a man orders coffee. Then he picked up the radio handset himself, looked his aide dead in the eye, and switched the frequency off. Not malfunction, not lost signal. He switched it off with his thumb, deliberately, while 9 American soldiers were still screaming on the other end. His aide lunged for the console. Whitaker caught him by the wrist and squeezed until the younger man went pale. "Touch that radio again," Whitaker said softly, "and I will destroy you. Subscribe to this channel if you believe no soldier should ever be left behind. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled." Now let's go back to that valley and to the night one forgotten pilot decided that a general's cowardice was not going to be the last thing those men ever heard. The radio call came in at 11:47 p.m. Not that time meant much anymore to the men of Task Force Liberty. When you've been fighting for 6 hours straight, when your last armored vehicle is burning on its side 30 yards behind you, and when the mountain ridgeline above you is lit up with muzzle flashes that seem to multiply every time you kill, one time stops being measured in minutes. It gets measured in ammunition, in blood, in the distance between you and the men who are supposed to be coming to save you. Captain Jake Miller had been counting all three for the last 90 minutes. He pressed his back against the crumbling mud wall that had been giving his squad whatever cover a crumbling mud wall could give, which at this point was not much, and he keyed his radio. "Ghost Actual, this is Liberty 6. Say again your last. I need air support coordinates confirmed. We have 2 wounded, we have 1 KIA, and we have enemy armor moving on our eastern flank. I need somebody in the sky right now." "Do you copy?" Static, then a voice, clear, calm, and utterly devastating in its simplicity. "Liberty 6, this is Ghost Actual. We copy your situation. Air support is not available at this time. You are ordered to hold your position until extraction can be coordinated." Jake Miller had been in the Army for 11 years. He had served 3 tours. He had seen things that men weren't built to see. But in all of those years, through all of those moments, he had never once heard words that hit him like those words. Air support is not available. He looked to his left. Sergeant First Class Dominic Torres was crouched beside him, pressing a field dressing against a wound on his left arm that was soaking through faster than either of them wanted to admit. Torres looked back at him. He had heard the transmission. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Jake keyed the radio again. "Ghost Actual, I need you to repeat that last transmission. I need confirmation. We have enemy armor less than 300 meters from our position. I have men down. I need air now, not in an hour, not in 30 minutes. Now." "Liberty 6, your situation is acknowledged. Air assets are not available for deployment at this time per command decision. Hold your position. Extraction is being coordinated." Per command decision, those 3 words. Jake let go of the radio and leaned his head back against the mud wall. Above him, tracer rounds cut red lines across the night sky. He could hear the mechanical grinding of a vehicle engine somewhere in the darkness to the east. He knew what that sound meant. He had heard it before. A BMP, an infantry fighting vehicle, and it was getting closer. "Guys," he said quietly. The soldiers around him turned. There were 9 of them left in fighting condition. 9 men, some of them barely 20 years old, looking at their captain with expressions he would carry for the rest of his life. "They're not sending air support," he said. Nobody spoke. Private First Class Danny Cho, 22 years old, from Riverside, California, opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Sir," he said very carefully, "did you just say they're not sending anyone?" "That is what I said." "Sir, with respect, what the absolute Cho?" "Sir, not now." Danny Cho pressed his lips together and looked away. His hands were shaking. Jake watched him and felt something twist in his chest, something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite despair, but lived somewhere in the territory between the two. The vehicle sound was getting louder. Sergeant Torres pulled himself up straighter and checked the magazine on his rifle, even though they all knew exactly how many rounds he had left. It was a thing soldiers did, something to do with your hands when there was nothing else to do. "Okay," Torres said. "Okay, so what's the plan?" Captain Jake Miller looked at the faces around him. Then he looked at the sky. Empty. The sky was completely, entirely, devastatingly empty. "We hold," he said. "We hold this position, and we keep fighting, and we wait for extraction." "How long, Orasi?" Torres asked. "Until it gets here." And if it doesn't get here in time, Jake didn't answer that because there was no answer that would help anyone. Itamam, 3 miles away in the operations center, established in a forward operating base that smelled like diesel fuel and burnt coffee. The argument was already happening. Major Derek Haynes had served under General Thomas Whitaker for 4 years. In those 4 years, he had watched Whitaker make decisions that were brilliant decisions that were cautious and decisions that he didn't personally agree with but understood from a strategic standpoint. What he was watching right now was none of those things. Sir, he said, keeping his voice controlled, keeping it professional, because losing his composure in front of a general was not something Derek Haynes allowed himself to do. Sir, Task Force Liberty is in an untenable position. We have the assets. Hangar 7 has an A-10 that is technically mission capable. If we authorize one aircraft, we'll stop. I said no. Whitaker didn't even look up from the map he was studying. The situation in the valley is a result of Liberty 6 making unauthorized advances beyond their assigned operational boundary. They exceeded their mandate, Major. The consequences of that decision are on Captain Miller, not on this command. Derek stared at him. Sir, with respect, there are American soldiers dying down there right now. Whitaker looked up. His eyes were flat and cold in a way that Derek Haynes had never seen before. Not angry, not conflicted, just flat. Like a man who had already made his decision and filed it somewhere where no amount of human reality was going to reach it. There are American soldiers dying in a lot of places, Major, Whitaker said. That is the nature of the job. My responsibility is to this entire operation. Committing air assets to an unauthorized engagement jeopardizes the broader mission. The answer is no. That decision is final. Do I make myself clear? Sir, do I make myself clear? Derek Haynes stood at attention. His jaw was tight. His hands were straight at his sides. Yes, sir, he said. Perfectly clear. Whitaker returned to his map. Derek turned away and walked to the far side of the operations center where the secondary communications bank was set up. He stood there for a moment staring at the radio console, listening to the traffic coming in from the valley. He could hear Captain Miller's voice. He could hear the gunfire in the background. He could hear everything that Whitaker was choosing not to hear. He reached for the handset, then he stopped, because the order had been given by a general, and a major did not override a general. He set the handset back down, and he hated himself for it. Hangar 7 was not supposed to exist anymore. That was the thing about it. The paperwork had already been drawn up to reassign the facility, to move the remaining equipment to officially close the building and reassign its designation. The A-10 sitting inside it was listed as pending maintenance review, which in military bureaucratic language meant that someone somewhere hadn't finished deciding what to do with it yet, and until they did it, just sat there in the dark with the lights off and the dust settling on its wings. Major Sarah Caldwell had been using the hangar for 3 months. Not officially, not with anyone's permission, not with anyone's knowledge if she was being completely accurate about it. She slept on a cot she dragged in from supply. She ate food from a bag. She did her paperwork in the hangar office, and she spent the rest of her hours doing something that no one on the base could quite explain if they'd known about it. She was keeping that airplane ready to fly. Not because she'd been ordered to. Not because there was any reason to believe she'd ever be authorized to fly it again. She did it because she was Sarah Caldwell, and because for Sarah Caldwell, an aircraft that could fly but was being allowed to die was a personal offense that she could not leave alone. She had the military radio on. She always had it on. She heard Captain Miller's first call. She heard Ghost Actual's first response. She sat very still on the edge of her cot and listened as the calls went back and forth as the situation in the valley got worse, as Miller's voice stayed controlled and professional, even as the men around him were running out of time and ammunition, and she listened to the flat bureaucratic responses coming from the operations center, and she felt something happen inside her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not anger exactly, closer to recognition. She recognized this moment. She had lived this moment from the other side. She had been Captain Miller once. She had been in the valley on the ground calling for support that wasn't coming, and she remembered exactly what that felt like. She remembered the moment she accepted that help was not going to arrive. She remembered what that did to you. And then she thought about the pilot who came anyway. The pilot who nobody ever talked about. The pilot who had flown for her unit in a situation so similar to this one that the details sometimes blurred together in her memory when she was tired. The pilot who had received the same order to stand down and had made a different decision. The pilot who had saved her life and the lives of 11 other soldiers and had been quietly reassigned 6 weeks later because of it, because that was how the military sometimes handled people who were right at the wrong moment. She didn't know where that pilot was now, but she knew where she was. She stood up, she walked to the A-10 and put her hand on the fuselage. The metal was cold under her palm. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the radio, listening to Miller, asking one more time, one more desperate, professionally worded request for air support, and she heard the response come back the same way it always had. Asset deployment, not authorized. Hold your position, Liberty 6. Sarah took a long breath. Then she reached for her helmet. The thing about the A-10 Thunderbolt II that people who had never been near one didn't understand was the sound. Not the sound of the engines, though. Those were something. Not the sound of the cannon, though. That was something else entirely. The sound she was thinking about was the sound it made before it started. The sound of a big, complicated machine waking up from sleep. The clicks and hums and pressure shifts. The sound of systems running diagnostics. The sound of fuel moving through lines. The sound of something that was built to do one specific thing, preparing to do that thing. Sarah knew every sound this aircraft made the way she knew the sound of her own breathing. She ran through the checklist the way she had run through it hundreds of times, not rushing, not panicking. She was beyond panic at this point. She was in the place she always went before a mission, the place where everything got very clear and very quiet inside her head, even as the world outside got louder. The engines turned over. The first mechanic who heard it was Sergeant Raymond Okafor, who was working a night shift on a completely different aircraft 30 yards away, and who dropped his wrench with a clatter that echoed across the concrete floor when the sound hit him. He turned around. The A-10 in Hangar 7 was alive. He stood there for 3 seconds with his mouth open. Then he started walking toward it. Then he started walking faster. By the time he reached the hangar entrance, he was running. "Hey," he said, though nobody could hear him yet over the engine noise. Hey, who is the aircraft was already moving?" Sarah had her helmet on. She had done her checks. She had done everything that needed to be done, and the one thing she had not done was call anyone to tell them what she was doing, because she knew exactly what would happen if she called. She knew the word would reach Whitaker within 30 seconds. She knew the order would come through to stand down. She knew that if she picked up that radio and asked permission, permission would be denied, and then she would have to decide whether to disobey a direct order that she knew about, which was categorically worse than disobeying an order that she hadn't been explicitly given yet. She was a pilot who had been punished for doing the right thing once before. She was not interested in asking for permission again. The A-10 rolled out of Hangar 7 into the night air, and Sergeant Okafor stood in the doorway watching it go, and he reached for his radio and then he stopped. He had a brother who was Army infantry. He stood there for 4 seconds, which was enough time for the aircraft to reach the taxiway. Then he put his radio back without calling anyone. He would have a hard time explaining that decision later. He would also never regret it. The radio call to the operations center came from a radar operator who noticed a contact leaving the airfield without clearance. "Operations, we have an unauthorized departure. Tail number is standby." A pause. "Operations, I'm showing tail number 727 Foxtrot. That aircraft is supposed to be in maintenance status." In the operations center, the duty officer looked up. 77 Foxtrot. That's the A-10 in Hangar 7. That aircraft is grounded. Who authorized departure? Operations, nobody authorized it. It just launched. There was a pause. "Run it again." "Sir, I have run it 3 times, unauthorized launch. A-10 single aircraft heading toward grid sector Golf 7. Golf 7, the duty officer looked at the operational map. Golf 7 was the valley where Task Force Liberty was fighting for its life. He sat very still for 1 second. Then he reached for the phone to General Whitaker's desk. Whitaker picked up on the second ring. "What is it?" "Sir, this is Duty Officer Harrison. We have an unauthorized launch. An A-10 from Hangar 7 tail number 77 Foxtrot. It launched without clearance approximately 4 minutes ago. It is heading toward the Task Force Liberty operational area." Silence on the line. Then who authorized that aircraft? Sir, nobody authorized it. It launched independently. What do you mean independently? Aircraft don't launch independently. Who is the pilot? Harrison looked at the flight records on his screen. He had already pulled them. He already knew. And the answer was strange enough that he hesitated before saying it. Sir, he said carefully, according to maintenance records, the only person who has had access to that hangar in the last 90 days is... He paused again. Major Sarah Caldwell. Another silence, longer this time. Get me a channel to that aircraft, Whitaker said. His voice had changed. Something had moved into it that Harrison couldn't quite name. Now, Sarah was at altitude when the call came in. She expected it. She had been tracking the timeline in her head from the moment she left the runway. She knew how long it would take for radar to pick her up. She knew how long it would take for someone to identify the aircraft. She knew how long it would take for that information to reach Whitaker. She had been flying for 11 minutes. She was almost there. 77 Foxtrot, this is operations. Identify yourself and state your purpose. You are flying an unauthorized mission. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Sarah said nothing. 77 Foxtrot, respond. This is a direct order. She could see the valley ahead of her now. She could see the small explosions of gunfire on the ground, the tracer rounds moving in arcs, the burning vehicles. She could see the shape of the engagement from above, the way you could only ever really see it from above, and what she saw confirmed everything Miller had been reporting. They were surrounded on three sides. The armor on the eastern flank was moving. She had maybe 4 minutes before those vehicles reached firing distance of Miller's position. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was different. 77 Foxtrot, this is General Thomas Whitaker. Stand down. You are ordered to abort your approach and return to base. This is a direct order from a general officer. Do you copy? Sarah took a slow breath. She thought about everything that was going to happen after tonight. She thought about the review boards. She thought about the possible court-martial. She thought about her career, which had already been dismantled once and was now about to be dismantled in a more permanent and very public way. She thought about Captain Miller. She thought about the 9 men still breathing down there. She thought about the voice on her radio 3 years ago that had said the same thing, an unauthorized aircraft calling in before an attack, and how she had wept when she heard it, how every soldier around her had wept, because in that moment a voice on a radio was the only thing standing between them and death. She keyed her radio. General Whitaker, she said. Her voice was calm. It was genuinely, completely calm in a way she hadn't expected, but also wasn't surprised by. I copy your transmission. I have visual on Task Force Liberty's position. I have visual on enemy armor at grid Echo 77. I have 4 minutes of weapons effective approach remaining. I am continuing my approach. Silence. Caldwell. The general's voice was different now. Something in it had shifted from authority to something she couldn't immediately identify. You are throwing away everything. Your career, your record, everything you've worked for. Stand down. Respectfully, General. Sarah said, there are 9 men alive down there right now. I intend to keep them that way. She clicked the radio off. She pushed the aircraft into its attack profile. Below her in the valley, Captain Jake Miller was lying behind a crumbling wall with 3 of his soldiers counting rounds, making the mental calculations that no one should ever have to make when he heard something. He stopped. Everybody stopped. The sound came from everywhere at once, a deep, rolling mechanical roar that echoed off the valley walls and grew louder and louder until Torres grabbed Miller's arm with his good hand and pointed up. Through the smoke and the darkness, wings caught the faint moonlight. Wide wings, a straight silhouette, in the distinctive heavy-bodied shape that every soldier who had ever served in that part of the world knew on sight. Is that, Danny Cho started. Yeah, Torres said. His voice broke slightly on the word. Is that an A-10? Yeah, Cho, that is absolutely an A-10. The aircraft was coming in low. Lower than Miller had expected, lower than seemed safe, and he was about to think that thought all the way through when the night split open. The GAU-8 Avenger. There are very few sounds in the world that are genuinely difficult to describe. The GAU-8 firing at full rate is one of them. It was not a bang, it was not a rattle. It was something between a roar and a tearing sound, something mechanical and enormous, and when it fired, the ground at the eastern flank of Miller's position erupted. The first vehicle stopped moving. The second vehicle stopped moving. The soldiers around Miller went silent. Then Danny Cho, 22 years old, who had been shaking 30 seconds ago, started laughing. Not the laugh of someone who found something funny. The laugh of someone whose body had suddenly remembered how to feel relief and didn't know what to do with the sensation. She came back, Torres said quietly. He wasn't talking to anyone in particular. She came back, he said again. Miller reached for his radio. His hands were not entirely steady. Ghost Actual, this is Liberty 6. We have air support, unscheduled, unknown asset, but we have support. In the operations center, the duty officer was watching his radar screen with an expression that nobody in that room had ever seen on his face before. In the communications room, Major Derek Haynes had stopped pretending to do paperwork and was standing at the secondary radio console listening to every transmission, and there were tears on his face that he was not making any effort to conceal. And General Thomas Whittaker was standing at the primary communications console with the handset in his hand, and he had not said anything in 4 minutes, and every person in that room was acutely aware of his silence, but none of them were looking at him directly. The radar track showed a single A-10 working the valley. Methodical, pass after pass after pass, the enemy's advance had stopped. From the valley floor, Captain Miller was watching the sky the way a man watches something he was completely certain he would never see again. And in the privacy of that moment, in the noise and smoke and chaos of a battle that was turning, he let himself feel the thing he had been refusing to feel for the last hour. He let himself believe they were going to make it. Above them, Sarah Caldwell pulled the aircraft through a tight banking turn and lined up for another approach. The targeting system was feeding her everything she needed. She was working. She was entirely, completely, peacefully working. And for the first time in 3 years, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The operations center had gone almost entirely silent, except for the sound of radio traffic and the steady voice of the radar operator calling out positions. Whittaker was still holding the handset. Harrison watched him from across the room. Watched the general stare at the radar screen. Watched the track of the A-10 make another pass. Watched the data coming in from the valley that showed enemy armor, neutralized enemy advanced broken soldiers of Task Force Liberty, still alive, still breathing, still fighting, because one person had made a decision that a general had explicitly forbidden. Whittaker set the handset down. He turned away from the console. He walked to the large operational map on the wall and stood in front of it with his back to the room, and nobody could see his face and nobody said anything for a very long time. Finally, Harrison spoke. He didn't know why he was the one who said it. He would never be entirely sure. But someone had to. Sir, he said quietly, Task Force Liberty is reporting the enemy advance has been broken. They're requesting extraction window. Whittaker did not turn around. Authorize the extraction, he said. His voice was completely neutral. All available assets. Yes, sir. The room began to move again. People reached for radios. Coordinates were called. The extraction was set in motion. And in the valley below, Captain Miller heard the news that extraction was coming, and he passed it down the line to his men, and Danny Cho laughed again, and Torres said something under his breath that none of them caught, and somewhere overhead, the A-10 banked through the night sky one more time, its engine singing in the darkness. A forgotten machine that refused to be done, flown by a pilot who had been told her story was over, and had decided without apology that this was simply not true. The night still had a long way to go. Sarah was not finished, and the thing nobody in the operations center had said yet, the thing they were all thinking but hadn't found the words for, was this: whatever happened next, whatever reviews were convened, and whatever decisions were made in the days ahead, the name Major Sarah Caldwell was no longer something that could be quietly buried in a reassignment file. It was in the radio logs. It was in the radar records. It was in the memories of 9 men who were alive because she had flown toward a valley she was ordered to avoid. General Whittaker had said it was over. He had been wrong, and the whole world was about to find out exactly how wrong. The GAU-8 had stopped firing. That was the first thing Captain Jake Miller noticed when the ringing in his ears finally settled enough for him to process anything beyond the immediate fact that he was still alive. The cannon had gone quiet, the A-10 had pulled up and was banking somewhere above the smoke, and for 3 full seconds the valley was almost silent, which was the strangest sound Miller had heard all night. Then Torres grabbed his arm. East side, Torres said. Look at the east side. Miller looked. The two BMPs that had been grinding toward their position less than 4 minutes ago were stopped. Not retreating, not maneuvering, stopped. One of them was on fire. The other one had its front end dropped at an angle that told Miller everything he needed to know about what the GAU-8 had done to its drive system. She killed the armor, Miller said. She killed the armor, Torres confirmed. Danny Cho was still laughing. The laugh had changed from the overwhelming relief laugh to something quieter and more sustained. The kind of laugh that happens when a person's nervous system finally gets permission to believe the worst is over. Over. Cho was sitting with his back against the mud wall, his rifle across his knees, his head tilted back, laughing at the sky. Cho, Miller said, Sir, get on the eastern perimeter. Tell me what's moving. The laughter stopped. Cho was on his feet in under 2 seconds moving. Miller keyed his radio. Ghost Actual Liberty 6. We have enemy armor neutralized on eastern flank. Current position is... He stopped, listened, static. He tried again. Ghost Actual, do you copy? Liberty 6 is requesting status on extraction timeline. Static, more static. Then a voice, but not Ghost Actual, a different frequency, a voice he had never heard before coming through, clear and steady, with almost no background noise at all. Liberty 6, this is 7-7 Foxtrot. I have eyes on your position. I count 9 personnel, 1 casualty, 2 mobile wounded. Enemy infantry is regrouping on your northern ridge approximately 200 meters. You have maybe 6 minutes before they find another approach. What do you need? Miller looked at Torres. Torres looked at Miller. 7-7 Foxtrot. Miller said slowly, Are you the A-10? That is correct. Who sent you? A pause. Brief, maybe 2 seconds. Nobody sent me, Captain. I came on my own. The valley was quiet for a moment while Miller processed that. Well, he finally said, I'm very glad you made that decision. Northern ridge 200 meters. Enemy infantry unknown count. Can you work that? Already working it. Keep your heads down. The engines overhead changed pitch. Miller put his hand on Torres's shoulder and pushed him down behind the wall without a word. The GAU-8 spoke again. The Northern Ridge answered. And somewhere up in that aircraft, 11,000 feet of titanium bathtub, an attitude wrapped around a pilot who had been told her flying days were over. Sarah Caldwell was working through her targeting sequence with the kind of focus that doesn't come from training alone. It comes from something older than training. Something that gets built in the years between the missions and the quiet hangar nights, in the hours when you lie awake replaying every call that went wrong and every soldier you couldn't reach in time. She was not going to have another one of those nights. Not tonight. Not these men. She pulled off target and climbed to reset her approach, and while she climbed, she checked her fuel state and her weapon status and ran the numbers she didn't want to run. The numbers were honest with her even when she wasn't being honest with herself. She had enough for maybe 3 more effective passes. After that, she was flying home on fumes and hope. 3 passes. She needed to make them count. 12 minutes and 40 seconds had passed since she launched from the airfield. She knew because she had been counting. Back in the operations center, General Whitaker was no longer standing in front of the map. I was sitting at the primary command console with both hands flat on the surface in front of him, and he was reading the radar data that Harrison kept feeding him with quiet professionalism, and his face had not changed expression in 11 minutes, and every person in that room understood, without being told, that the general was performing the calculation that military men at his level spend their entire careers learning to perform without allowing emotion to corrupt the math. The calculation was simple. 1 unauthorized aircraft, 1 pilot who had disobeyed a direct order from a general officer, 1 active engagement that was currently being turned from a near massacre into a recoverable situation. The math of the situation said that Whitaker had been wrong. The institutional reflex said that generals were not wrong. Those 2 facts were currently at war inside Thomas Whitaker, and the room was waiting to see which one won. Major Derek Haynes was standing near the secondary console. He had his arms crossed. He hadn't said anything since Whitaker told him to authorize the extraction, and he was not going to say anything unless he was asked directly, because Derek Haynes had served long enough to know that there were moments when the most powerful thing you could do was stay quiet and make a man sit with his own decision. This was one of those moments. Harrison looked up from his console. Sir 77 Foxtrot is making another pass. Northern Ridge, enemy infantry position. Whitaker said nothing. Sir Liberty 6 is reporting the northern threat is being suppressed. They're requesting a hard timeline on extraction. Still nothing. Sir? I heard you, Harrison. Whitaker's voice was very controlled, very quiet. What is 77 Foxtrot's fuel state? Harrison checked. His eyebrows moved slightly. Sir, based on launch time and flight profile, she's running low. Maybe 20 minutes of flight time remaining. Possibly less. 20 minutes. Whitaker looked at the radar screen. He looked at the extraction request from Task Force Liberty. He looked at the fuel calculation. He did the math that anyone in that room could have done, the math that only one person in that room had the authority to act on. 20 minutes was not enough time for the extraction helicopters to reach the valley if they launched right now. If Sarah Caldwell turned back when her fuel hit reserve, Task Force Liberty would have a window of unsupported time before the helicopters arrived. If the enemy used that window, if they regrouped fast enough, if they found another approach. 9 men. Whitaker reached for the radio handset. He picked it up. He held it for 5 seconds without transmitting. Then he set it back down and turned to Harrison. Get me everything we have on that valley's approach corridor, he said. Secondary landing zones, anything the extraction team can use to cut their flight time. Harrison started moving. Haynes uncrossed his arms. He didn't say anything. But something in his posture changed. And if you knew Derek Haynes well enough to read him, which very few people did, you would have recognized it as the posture of a man who had just decided to let a general start finding his own way back to the right side of a decision he'd made badly. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something. 14 minutes since launch. In the valley, the northern ridge had gone quiet. Miller was doing a head count. He moved down the line of his soldiers the way he had done it 100 times in training and a dozen times in actual combat, touching shoulders, making eye contact, the physical confirmation that overrides everything the brain tries to tell you about the people around you. Ramirez. Here, sir. Nguyen. Here. I'm good. Chen. Here, sir. Arm is messed up, but I'm here. Alvarez. Here. Washington. A pause. Washington. Sir. The voice came from 2 positions down the line, quieter than the others. I'm here. I'm okay. I'm okay. Miller moved to him. Specialist Marcus Washington was 19 years old and had been in country for 4 months and was pressing both hands against his left side in a way that Miller recognized immediately. Let me see, Miller said. I'm fine, sir. Marcus, let me see. Washington moved his hands. The wound was not small. Miller had seen enough wounds to calibrate very quickly, and this one moved the internal needle from manageable to urgent without quite crossing into critical. But the gap between urgent and critical in a combat environment with no immediate medical support was not a comfortable gap to be in. Why didn't you call this in? Miller asked. Washington looked away. Didn't want to slow us down. Marcus, you are 19 years old and you have been fighting with a hole in your side for the last 40 minutes. I need you to tell me this kind of thing. Sorry, sir. Miller was already pulling his own field dressing from his kit. Don't be sorry. Just stay conscious. Can you do that for me? Yes, sir. Good man. Torres appeared at Miller's elbow. How bad? Bad enough. We need that extraction window. I'll get back on comms. Already on it. Miller stood up, pressed the dressing into Washington's hands to hold in place and grabbed his radio. 77 Foxtrot Liberty 6. I have a priority casualty. Penetrating abdominal wound, ambulatory for now, but that's going to change. What's your situation? Sarah's voice came back immediately. Liberty 6, I have 2 passes left, maybe 3 if I push my fuel margin. I am going to need to leave the area in approximately 15 minutes regardless. What is your extraction status? Negative on extraction. Helicopters are still 20 plus out. A brief silence. Copy that, Sarah said, and nothing else. Miller understood what that silence meant. He understood what she was calculating. He understood that she was up there right now deciding whether to push her fuel past the margin where a return to base was guaranteed, and he understood what that decision meant for her personally, and he understood that she was making it for Marcus Washington, who she had never met and would never meet, for Marcus Washington, who was 19 years old and had hidden a hole in his side for 40 minutes because he didn't want to slow anyone down. He clicked the radio. 77 Foxtrot Liberty 6. Don't do anything stupid up there. Another silence. Shorter this time. Captain, Sarah said, I've been doing stupid things since I was 24 years old. I'm very good at it by now. Torres, who was close enough to hear the radio, made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated than a laugh. I like her, he said. Yeah, Miller said. Me too. 16 minutes since launch. The enemy had not gone away. That was the thing Miller kept reminding himself of. The thing he couldn't let the relief of the air support make him forget. The armor was neutralized. The northern ridge was suppressed. But the enemy in this valley was not a disorganized force that broke and scattered when they took casualties. They were patient and they were adaptive. And Miller had enough experience with patient, adaptive enemies to know that right now, somewhere in the dark, someone was adjusting, regrouping, finding the angle that the A-10 couldn't cover and that Task Force Liberty's depleted ammunition supply couldn't answer. He needed to find that angle before they did. Torres, he said, yeah. Take Ramirez and Alvarez, southern approach. If they're regrouping, they're going to try to come around behind us. On it. Torres was already moving. Miller turned to the remaining soldiers. Chen Washington, you two are staying in this position. Chen, you are Washington's protection. Washington, you are staying alive. Those are your orders. Is that clear? Sir, Chen said. Marcus. Yes, sir. Washington's voice was steadier than Miller expected. The kid had something in him, something that wouldn't quit. Miller had met maybe 3 or 4 soldiers in his career who had it, and recognizing it in someone always made him feel 2 things at the same time: profound admiration and profound responsibility. You stay with me, Miller said. We're going to get you home. Washington nodded once. Miller believed what he said. He made himself believe it, because the alternative was not useful to anyone. 18 minutes since launch, Sarah made her 3rd pass, the southern ridge. She had seen the movement on her targeting system before Miller had even identified it as a threat, which was the thing about being in the sky, about having that altitude and that view. You saw the whole board in a way that the people on the ground simply could not. She had watched the enemy infantry begin to reposition toward the southern approach, while Miller was still dealing with the northern ridge, and she had not said anything about it yet because she was still working the northern problem. And by the time the northern problem was resolved, she had the southern one lined up and ready. She pressed the trigger. The cannon hammered through the night. The southern approach answered, then went quiet. Miller's voice came through her headset almost immediately. 7-7 Foxtrot, we have movement on the southern. A pause. Movement neutralized. How did you? I can see the whole valley from up here, Captain, and Sarah said. I saw them moving before you did. You saw them before we did. That is correct. And you handled it. That is also correct. Another pause from Miller. Then 7-7 Foxtrot, I genuinely do not know your name, but when we get out of this, I intend to find out and buy you a very expensive dinner. Despite everything, despite the fuel state and the weapons count and the calculations running constantly in the back of her mind, despite the very real possibility that she was going to have to make a decision in the next 4 minutes that could end her career permanently, or if the fuel math went badly enough, and considerably more than her career. Despite all of it, Sarah Caldwell smiled. Liberty 6, she said. I eat at very expensive restaurants. Fair warning. Noted, Miller said. And even through the radio, she could hear that he was smiling too. Back in the operations center, something had shifted. It was not a single dramatic moment. It was not a speech or a confrontation or a revelation. It was something quieter and more structural, the kind of shift that happens in a room when the facts on the ground have moved far enough away from the decisions that created them, that everyone is forced to start operating in the present tense instead of defending the past. Whitaker was coordinating the extraction, and he was on the radio with the helicopter crews cutting minutes off their approach by approving a more direct route that carried additional risk, but shaved 7 minutes off the timeline. He was authorizing a forward medical team to meet the extraction at the secondary landing zone. He was doing his job, the part of his job that no one could ever take away from him, regardless of how the night ended, and he was doing it with the competence that had gotten him to where he was. But Harrison noticed something that Whitaker could not control. When the general spoke on the radio now, when he gave instructions and coordinates and authorizations, none of it mentioned 7-7 Foxtrot. None of it acknowledged the A-10 in the valley. None of it named Sarah Caldwell or referenced her position or her fuel state, or the fact that she was the reason Task Force Liberty still had 9 men breathing and not 6. Whitaker was weaving the extraction plan around her as if she were a fixed feature of the landscape. A mountain, a river, something that was there and was being accounted for but was not being spoken of. Harrison watched this and said nothing. Haynes watched this and said nothing. The room said nothing. Because they all understood that the general was doing the only thing left available to him, which was to make the extraction work and let the question of credit and blame and responsibility sort itself out in the daylight when there were reports to file and reviews to convene and decisions to formalize. The daylight was coming. Everyone in that room knew it. 21 minutes since launch. Sarah looked at her fuel gauge. She had known this moment was coming. She had been watching the number decrease with the steady patience of someone who has made peace with a thing they cannot change, only manage. The number was now in a place where certain decisions were becoming unavoidable. She did the math. If she turned back right now, she would make the runway with fuel to spare. If she stayed for one more pass, she would make the runway with a margin that was technically within parameters, but that any experienced pilot would describe as uncomfortably tight. If she stayed for 2 more passes, she would be making decisions based on weather and wind that she could not fully predict from inside the cockpit. If she stayed for 3 more passes, she was gambling. She looked at her weapons state. She looked at her radar. She looked at the valley below where 9 men were holding a position that was still not safe, where the extraction helicopters were still 12 minutes out, where the enemy was still out there in the dark, being patient and adaptive. She thought about Marcus Washington. 19 years old, hole in his side, didn't want to slow anyone down. She keyed her radio. Liberty 6, 77 Foxtrot, go ahead. Captain, I need an honest answer from you. Not a tactically optimistic answer. An honest one. A brief pause. Go ahead. If I leave the area right now, Sarah said, and the enemy makes another push in the next 12 minutes before your extraction arrives, can your team hold? The pause this time was longer. She could hear Miller thinking. She could hear the weight of the honest answer pressing against the professionally optimistic one. Nody Miller finally said, Washington is down. Torres is compromised. We are running on maybe 30% of our original loadout. If they push us again in the next 12 minutes, we hold for a while, and then we don't. Sarah nodded to herself. She had already known the answer. She had asked because she wanted Miller to know that she knew. She wanted him to understand that she was not staying because she had failed to do the math. She was staying because she had done the math precisely, and the math said that her fuel margin was less important than Marcus Washington getting home. Copy that, Liberty 6, she said. I'm staying on station. 77 Foxtrot, your fuel. Is my problem, Captain. You handle your side of the valley. I'll handle mine. She heard Miller start to say something else. She clicked off before he could finish it. Not because she didn't want to hear it, because if he said the thing she thought he was about to say, the thank you, or the I don't know how to tell you what this means, or the thing that soldiers sometimes said, when they understood that someone was making a personal sacrifice for them, she was going to have a harder time staying in the calm, professional place she needed to be in for the next 12 minutes. She stayed in that place by staying in motion. She pushed the aircraft into a holding pattern and watched the ground and waited. 24 minutes since launch. They came from the west. She almost didn't see it in time. The movement was subtle. No vehicles, no armor, just infantry moving carefully through a ravine that her targeting system had been treating as low priority because nothing significant had come out of it in the first 20 minutes of the engagement. But they were in there, moving low, moving slow, and they were going to reach Miller's position in approximately 4 minutes. Liberty 6 West, ravine approximately 50 meters from your position. Infantry, I count 8, possibly more. She heard Miller shout something to his soldiers. Heard the scramble. She was already in her attack profile. The pass was tight, tighter than she liked. The ravine was narrow and Miller's position was close, dangerously close, and the margin for error was the kind of margin that flight instructors spent entire courses teaching you to never accept. She accepted it. She fired. The ravine erupted. When it settled, there was no more movement from the west. Miller's voice came back. It was different now. Quieter. 77 Foxtrot. That was close. I know. How close? Close enough that I would prefer not to repeat it, Sarah said. How are your people? Shaken, intact. Copy that. She climbed back to altitude. 26 minutes since launch. Her fuel was in the place she had known it was going to be. The math was not kind. She started running contingencies. Emergency landing options. Fields she had seen on the way in. Roads that were straight enough in the dark. She was not panicking. Panic was a word that did not apply to the mental space she was in right now. She was making plans and she was making backup plans, and she was doing it with the same focus of quiet that had carried her through every difficult pass of the night. But she did not tell Miller. Because telling Miller right now would put his mind in two places when it needed to be in one. She kept that information to herself. She would deal with it when she dealt with it. 28 minutes. In the operations center, Harrison did a quiet calculation that nobody asked him to do and then sat very still for a moment before speaking. Sir, he said to Whitaker. What? 77 Foxtrot's fuel state. Based on launch time and the flight profile I've been tracking, she is... He paused. He was aware of Haynes turning to look at him. He was aware of every person in the room orienting toward his voice. She has passed her comfortable return margin, sir. She has been past it for approximately 6 minutes. The room was quiet. Whitaker looked at the radar track. She knows, he said. It was not a question. She knows, Harrison confirmed. Another silence. And she's still on station, Whitaker said. Yes, sir, she's still on station. Whitaker sat with that for a moment. The room sat with it too. There were things happening on Thomas Whitaker's face that Harrison had no framework for, because in 4 years of working near the man he had never seen, those particular muscles do those particular things. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then Whitaker's face went controlled again, and he reached for his radio. 77 Foxtrot, he said. This is General Whitaker. The room froze. Every person in it, including Haynes, stopped what they were doing. Silence from the aircraft for 3 full seconds. Then Sarah's voice came back. Clear, steady. General Whitaker, I copy. What is your fuel state? A pause. It's being managed, sir. That is not an answer, Major. Another pause, slightly longer. No, sir, Sarah said. It is not. Whitaker looked at the radar track. Extraction is 9 minutes out, he said. Can you hold for 9 minutes? I can hold for 9 minutes, sir. And then you will return to base. And then I will return to base. Major, Whitaker stopped, cleared his throat. The sound of it was surprisingly human. Almost rough. 9 minutes. Then you come home. The silence that followed was the longest one of the night. Then Sarah said simply, Yes, sir. Whitaker set the handset down. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. There are moments in a military operation when a single radio transmission says more than 100 pages of after-action report, when the words exchanged between two people across a frequency carry the full weight of everything that was decided and everything that should have been decided differently, and everything that is going to have to be reckoned with in the morning. This was one of those moments. 31 minutes since launch, 8 minutes until extraction. In the valley, Miller had his soldiers in extraction position. He had Washington loaded between Chen and Ramirez with strict instructions to keep him upright and keep him talking. He had Torres on the northern approach watching for any last-minute movement. He had Cho and Nguyen on visual for the extraction helicopters. He had the radio in his hand. He was listening to the sound of the A-10 overhead. The sound had changed slightly in the last few minutes. He was not an aviation expert. He was not a pilot. He could not have told you technically what the difference was. But he had been listening to that aircraft for the better part of an hour, and something in his gut told him the engine note was different than it had been, and he was a soldier who had learned to trust his gut, and his gut was doing something uncomfortable right now. He keyed his radio. 77 Foxtrot, status. On station Liberty 6. Clear, skies up here. 7 minutes to extraction. You doing okay up there? A brief pause that was maybe half a second longer than usual. Never better, Captain. He almost believed her, almost. 77 Foxtrot, he said very quietly so the soldiers around him couldn't quite hear it. You tell me if anything changes up there. You tell me immediately. That is not a request. A pause. Understood, Liberty 6. 6 minutes. The helicopters came in from the south, and Cho saw them first, and he made a sound that was not a word in any language, but communicated everything perfectly. And Miller looked up and saw the running lights and felt something release in his chest that had been locked tight for the better part of 2 hours. Liberty 6, Nighthawk 1, we are 2 minutes out. Popping smoke on my mark. Nighthawk 1, Liberty 6, copy, mark. The smoke grenade hit the ground, and the orange smoke curled upward, and the helicopters adjusted their approach, and Miller was already moving, already counting his soldiers, already running the checklist that lived in his muscle memory. Let's go, let's move. Torres on me. Washington, you're first on the bird. Chen, you don't let go of him. Ramirez Alvarez, cover the north until I say different. The helicopters were landing, the rotors were loud, everything was loud. And above it all, above the smoke and the rotor wash and the sound of boots hitting ground and soldiers moving and the thousand small sounds of an extraction in progress, Miller could still hear the A-10. He could hear it circling, holding station, watching over them until the last possible second. He climbed into the helicopter. He counted heads. He counted again. 9 men, all 9, every single one. Nighthawk 1, Liberty 6, we're loaded. We are good to go. Copy, Liberty 6, lifting. The helicopter rose. Miller leaned forward and looked out through the open door as the valley fell away beneath them, and he could see the smoke from the burning vehicles and the churned ground where the passes had gone in, and he could see the shape of the engagement from above the way you could only ever see it from above. And he could see the A-10, still up there, banking into a turn now that the helicopters were clear. The wings tilting in the darkness, and he watched it until he couldn't see it anymore, until the helicopter carried him over the ridge and the valley disappeared behind them. He sat back. Torres was sitting across from him, his wounded arm in a makeshift sling, his face gray with exhaustion but his eyes open and completely present. She stayed, Torres said. Yeah. She stayed the whole time, even when she didn't have to. Yeah. Torres looked at the floor of the helicopter for a moment. Then he looked back up. Who is she? Miller thought about the voice on the radio, the calm, the focus, the half-second pause before I can hold for 9 minutes. The way she had taken the Western Ravine Pass that was too close to be comfortable and had not said a single word about it afterward. The expensive restaurants. The way she had cut him off before he could say thank you because she needed to stay in her focused, quiet place, and she knew that a thank you would crack it. I don't know yet, Miller said, but I'm going to find out. Washington, lying across the bench with Chen's hand keeping pressure on his side, opened his eyes. Sir, he said. Washington, stay still. Who was the pilot? Miller looked at him, at this 19-year-old kid with a hole in his side who had hidden it for 40 minutes. I don't know, Miller said. We're going to find out. Washington closed his eyes again. Tell her thank you, he said, from me. The helicopter carried them toward the horizon. Behind them in the valley that had tried to swallow them whole, the fires were burning down. And in the sky above it, one aircraft was turning for home on a fuel state that was honest about what it was, carrying a pilot who had stayed until the last possible moment, who had watched the helicopters lift and had let herself breathe for the first time in 35 minutes, who was now doing the math. She had been putting off the math about the runway and the fuel and the wind and the margin, and she was making it work the way she had been making things work her entire career, finding the solution in the numbers that other people said didn't have one. She was going home, but the morning was still coming, and the morning was going to have questions. Questions that General Whitaker was going to have to answer in writing. Questions that Sarah Caldwell had already answered with everything she had done tonight. The kind of questions that don't have a right answer once you've already seen what the wrong one costs. Part 3, the morning after the A-10 touchdown at 1:23 a.m. Not cleanly. Not the kind of landing that gets written up in training manuals as an example of textbook execution. The aircraft came in heavy and slow, the engines doing exactly what engines do when they have been pushed past the margin that responsible pilots don't push past, and the right main gear hit the runway first in a way that sent a shudder through the entire airframe that Sarah felt in her spine and her back teeth simultaneously. She held it. She kept the nose up until the speed was right and let it settle, and the aircraft rolled out longer than she would have liked. And when it finally stopped, she sat in the cockpit for 11 seconds without moving. 11 seconds. She counted them. Then she began her shutdown sequence. The engines wound down with the sound of something very large and very tired. Finally being allowed to rest, and in the sudden quiet of the cockpit, Sarah Caldwell took the first full breath she had taken in 37 minutes. She took it slowly. Let it all the way in, let it all the way out. She pulled off her helmet. Her hair was damp. Her hands, when she looked at them, were steady, which surprised her slightly because there was a part of her that had expected them to shake now that the mission was over and the focused, quiet place was dissolving back into ordinary consciousness. But they were steady. They had always been steady after. It was before that her hands sometimes shook in the hours leading up to a mission in the decision-making before the doing. Once the doing started, her hands became the most reliable part of her. She climbed out of the cockpit. Sergeant Raymond Okafor was standing at the base of the ladder. He was the same mechanic who had watched the aircraft roll out of Hangar 7 an hour ago and had made the decision not to call anyone. He was standing there now with his arms at his sides and his face doing something complicated that Sarah recognized as the expression of a man who has made a decision he isn't sure was right and is waiting to find out. She stepped off the ladder onto the tarmac. They looked at each other. "Sergeant Okafor," she said. "Ma'am, you didn't call it in." He was quiet for a moment. "No, ma'am, I did not." "Why not?" Another pause. Longer. He looked away briefly, then back. "My brother is infantry, ma'am, served 2 tours, came home because somebody in the air was paying attention when they should have been." He paused again. "I figured if someone was going to get in trouble tonight, it shouldn't be because of me." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to get questioned," she said, "when this goes to review, and it is going to review." "I know, ma'am." "What are you going to say?" Okafor thought about it. Then he said with the careful simplicity of a man who has worked out exactly where his line is, "I'm going to say I saw an aircraft launch, and I made a judgment call about whether to report it. And I'm going to say that given what I know now, I would make the same call again." Sarah nodded once. "Get this aircraft secured and in for maintenance assessment," she said. "It earned it tonight." "Yes, ma'am." She walked past him toward the hangar. She had taken maybe 30 steps when she heard the vehicles. 3 of them, moving fast across the tarmac from the direction of the operations building, headlights cutting the darkness. They stopped 20 feet from her and the doors opened before the engines were fully off and 4 people got out, and the 4th one was General Thomas Whitaker. Sarah stopped walking. She turned around. She stood at attention. Whitaker walked toward her. The 3 men with him, 2 aides and a security officer, stopped when he raised his hand without looking back at them. He kept walking until he was 6 feet from Sarah, and then he stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and the tarmac was quiet except for the sound of the A-10's engines still cooling the metal, contracting the small sounds of a machine coming back to rest. "Major Caldwell," Whitaker said. "General Whitaker, you disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir, I did." "From a general officer." "Yes, sir." "You launched an unauthorized aircraft. You flew an unauthorized mission. You engaged the enemy without orders. You violated direct instructions given to you over an open channel." "Yes, sir, all of that is accurate." Whitaker looked at her. His face was unreadable in the way that faces become unreadable when the person wearing them has decided not to make their next decision from emotion. "9 soldiers are alive right now," he said. "Who would not be?" It was not a question. Sarah said nothing. "One of them," Whitaker continued, "has a penetrating abdominal wound. The medics who met the extraction say he would not have survived another 40 minutes without evacuation. He would have been one of the ones who did not come home." Still she said nothing. Whitaker looked away for a moment, then back. "You are confined to quarters pending a full review of tonight's events," he said. "You will surrender your flight credentials to my aide in the morning. You will prepare a full written account of your actions and your decision-making process from the moment you entered Hangar 7. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "You will not speak to the press. You will not speak to other personnel about this incident. You will not contact anyone in Task Force Liberty. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." Something moved through Whitaker's face then, something fast and complicated that Sarah almost missed because she was trained to watch people's faces and she was watching his very carefully. "Dismissed, Major," he said. She turned to go. "Caldwell." She stopped, turned back. Whitaker was looking at the A-10 behind her. At the aircraft sitting on the tarmac in the dark, damaged and fuel exhausted, and carrying the evidence of the night's work in every scratch and stress mark on its airframe. He did not look at her when he spoke. "The 9 men on that extraction," he said. His voice was different, quieter. Something had shifted in it that Sarah could not name precisely, but recognized as the sound of a man saying something he will not say again, and possibly has never said before. "There is one of them, Washington. Marcus Washington, 19 years old." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "I know." "He hid his wound for 40 minutes." "Yes, sir." Whitaker was quiet for a moment. "I have a son," he said, 20 years old. Sarah said nothing. Whitaker turned and walked back toward his vehicles without another word. Sarah watched him go. Then she turned back toward the hangar and walked alone through the dark, 1 hour and 4 minutes since launch. The review board convened at 0800 the same morning. That was the first unusual thing about it. Review boards for incidents of this nature typically took days to convene, sometimes weeks, while the paperwork worked its way through channels and the relevant parties gathered their documentation, and the institutional machinery of military accountability moved at the pace that institutional machinery always moved, which was not fast. This one convened in 9 hours. Major Derek Haynes noticed that and filed it away without comment. He had been awake since before the incident began and had not slept. He had spent the hours between Sarah's landing and the review board's convening, doing what officers do in the time between an event and the official response to it, which is making sure their own understanding of the event is as complete and accurate as possible before other people's understanding of it starts to harden into something official. He had read every radio log. He had reviewed the radar records. He had spoken quietly with Harrison, who had spoken quietly with 2 other personnel who had been in the operations center during the incident. And he had done one other thing, one thing that was slightly outside the normal channels, but not technically outside regulations, which was to contact the forward medical unit that had met the task force Liberty extraction. He had asked about Marcus Washington. Washington was in surgery. The medical officer he spoke to was cautious with specifics, as medical officers always were. But Haynes had learned over many years how to read caution, and what he read was that the extraction had been close enough in timing to matter. Not close in the vague sense, close in the sense that matters. He took that information into the review board with him. The board was convened in a conference room in the operations building, and when Haynes walked in, he counted the people at the table and made a mental note of who was there and who was not. 3 senior officers he recognized, a JAG representative, 2 aides, a court reporter. General Whitaker was not in the room. That was the second unusual thing. A review board for an incident at this level, involving a direct violation of an order given by a general officer, would normally have the general either presiding or present. His absence was a choice. Haynes noted it and sat down. Sarah was brought in 5 minutes later. She had slept maybe 2 hours, maybe 3, and she was in clean uniform, and she sat at the designated seat at the table with her hands folded in front of her, and her face in the composed professional expression that Haynes had learned over the course of one night to understand was not detachment, but its opposite. It was the face of a person who feels everything very deeply and has learned to hold it in the one place where it cannot interfere with the work. The senior officer at the head of the table, Colonel Richard Ferris, opened the review. "Major Caldwell, this board has been convened to review the events of last night, specifically your unauthorized launch of aircraft tail number 77. Foxtrot, your conduct of an unauthorized combat mission in Operational Sector Gulf 7, and your failure to comply with a direct order issued by General Whitaker. You have been informed of your rights. Do you understand the nature of this proceeding?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "Do you wish to have legal representation present?" "No, sir." Ferris looked at her with an expression that suggested he found that answer professionally inadvisable. "Major, given the potential consequences of Colonel Ferris." Sarah said, "I understand the consequences. I made the decisions I made with full awareness of what they meant for my career. I don't need a lawyer to help me describe decisions I made with my eyes open." Ferris looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. "Very well. Walk us through the events beginning from the moment you entered Hangar 7. Sarah walked them through it. She did not minimize. She did not editorialize. She did not use the language of justification or excuse. She spoke in the flat, factual language of a pilot describing a mission, and she described every decision she had made, including the decision to push past her fuel margin, including the Western Ravine Pass that had been too close, including the moment she had switched off the radio rather than hear Miller say thank you because it would have compromised her operational focus. She described all of it. The room was very quiet while she spoke. When she finished, Ferris looked at his notes for a moment. Then he looked up. Major Caldwell, at any point during this incident, did you consider returning to base when ordered? Yes, sir. And you chose not to? Yes, sir. Why? Sarah looked at him steadily. Because 9 soldiers would have died, sir, and I was in a position to prevent that. And the order from a general officer was issued by someone who did not have complete situational awareness of what would happen if the order was followed, Sarah said. That is not a criticism. That is a description of the information available at the time. Ferris leaned forward slightly. Major, are you suggesting that your judgment superseded the judgment of a general officer? No, sir, Sarah said. I am suggesting that my position gave me information that General Whitaker did not have at the moment the order was given. I am suggesting that I used that information to make a decision, and I am suggesting that 9 men came home because of that decision, including one who would not have survived another 40 minutes without evacuation. The JAG representative, who had been silent until this moment, spoke up. Major, you are aware that the military justice system does not recognize outcome as a justification for insubordination. I am aware of that, sir, yes. The fact that your decision resulted in positive outcomes does not legally excuse the violation of a direct order. I understand that, sir. Then you understand the potential consequences. Yes, sir, I have understood them since the moment I sat in that cockpit. The JAG representative looked at his papers, then back at her. And yet, Sarah said, silence. Then something happened that nobody in the room had been expecting. The door opened. Colonel Ferris looked up with the expression of a man whose proceeding is being interrupted in a way that is above his pay grade to object to. General Thomas Whitaker walked in. He was not in the room that was expected of him. He had not been announced. He had no aides with him. He walked in alone, and he closed the door behind him, and he stood at the end of the table and looked at the assembled board members with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in discussing whether the decision was correct. Colonel Ferris, he said. Ferris stood up automatically. Everyone at the table stood. General Whitaker, sir, we were not informed that you would be. I know you weren't. Whitaker looked at the chair at the head of the table. Sit down, Colonel. Ferris sat. Whitaker did not sit. He remained standing at the end of the table, and he looked at Sarah for a moment, and Sarah looked back at him, and neither of them said anything. Then Whitaker looked at the board. I have reviewed the radio logs from last night's incident, he said. I have reviewed the radar records. I have reviewed the after-action summary from Task Force Liberty, which was submitted by Captain Jacob Miller approximately 2 hours ago. He paused. I have also reviewed the medical report on Specialist Marcus Washington, who is currently in post-operative recovery after surgery for a penetrating abdominal wound. The room was very quiet. The medical assessment, Whitaker continued, indicates that Specialist Washington would not have survived without evacuation within the extraction window that was achieved. A delay of 30 to 40 minutes would have resulted in a fatality. He stopped. I want that on the record. Ferris looked at the court reporter who was typing. On the record, sir, Ferris confirmed. Whitaker nodded. Then he did the thing that nobody in the room had prepared for. He sat down, not at the head of the table, not in the general's position. He pulled out a chair at the side of this table the way any other participant would, and he sat in it, and he placed his hands flat on the table in front of him. Major Caldwell violated a direct order, he said. That is a fact. It is in the radio logs. It is not in dispute. The order was given by me. That is also in the radio logs, also not in dispute. He looked at the board members one by one. What I am here to place on the record is this. The order I gave last night was given with incomplete situational awareness. I made a decision based on information I had at the time. That decision was wrong. He paused. The word sat in the room by itself for a moment. 9 soldiers are alive this morning who would not be if Major Caldwell had followed my order. I am putting that in the record, and I am recommending to this board that in their assessment of Major Caldwell's conduct, they weigh the full context of the situation, including the information available to the pilot that was not available to the commanding officer at the time the order was issued. Ferris stared at him. Sir, with respect, are you recommending? I am not recommending anything specific, Colonel. I am placing context on the record. The board will make its own determination. Whitaker looked at Sarah. As they should, he stood up. He straightened his uniform jacket. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle and turned back, and he looked at Sarah directly, and she looked back at him, and what passed between them in that moment was something that did not need to be recorded by the court reporter, because it existed in the space between people who have been through something together and come out on different sides of it and are still working out what that means. Major Caldwell, he said, "Sir, the men of Task Force Liberty submitted a formal statement this morning, all 9 of them, requesting that whatever action this board takes, it be made a matter of public record." He paused. Captain Miller's name is at the top of the statement. He used language that I cannot repeat in an official proceeding. Something moved across Sarah's face. Fast, gone almost immediately. "Thank you for telling me that, sir," she said. Whitaker left. The door closed. The room was silent for 4 seconds that felt much longer. Then the JAG representative cleared his throat. "Colonel Ferris," he said carefully, "I think we may need to take a recess." The board recessed. In the corridor outside the conference room, Major Derek Haynes was leaning against the wall with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He had not been permitted inside the boardroom. He was not a witness. He was not a participant. He was there because he had been awake for 19 hours and had nowhere else he particularly wanted to be. He saw Whitaker come out of the conference room. The general stopped when he saw Haynes. For a moment they looked at each other. Then Haynes said the thing he had not said the night before, the thing he had stopped himself from saying 3 separate times since the operation began. He said it quietly, without challenge, without the edge that might have made it into something other than what it was. "Sir," he said for the record, "I think you did the right thing in there." Whitaker looked at him. "I should have done it last night," the general said. "Yes, sir, you should have." Another silence. "Major Haynes," Whitaker said, "Sir, the next time I give an order that you believe is wrong, I would prefer that you tell me so directly rather than standing 3 feet away from the radio, hoping I change my mind." Haynes considered that for a moment. "Respectfully, sir," he said, "I tried." Whitaker thought back to the operations center, to Haynes standing in front of him saying, "Sir," and "Sir, there are Americans dying," and "Sir, with respect," and "Sir," and "Sir," and "Sir," until the word had lost all meaning. "You did," Whitaker said. "You did traitor." He walked away down the corridor. Haynes watched him go. Then he poured his cold coffee into a nearby trash can and went to find a fresh cup. The board reconvened 40 minutes later. In those 40 minutes, something had happened to the energy in the room. Haynes could feel it when he walked back into the corridor and saw the faces of the aides coming and going. Something had shifted. The machinery of official consequence, which had been moving in one clear direction since before dawn, had encountered something it wasn't built to process cleanly, which was a general officer walking into a review board uninvited and placing his own culpability on the record. Military bureaucracy was built for many things. It was not especially built for that. Inside the conference room, Colonel Ferris called the board back to order, and he looked at Sarah and he said the words that review boards say when they are about to deliver a finding, and Sarah listened to them with the same composure she had brought to every other moment of the last 12 hours. "Major Caldwell, this board finds that you did in fact violate a direct order issued by a general officer. This finding is not in question and cannot be set aside regardless of the outcome of the mission. However," Ferris paused. He looked at his notes. "However, this board also finds that the circumstances under which the order was violated present significant mitigating factors, including incomplete situational awareness at the command level, imminent risk to American lives, and a demonstrable causal connection between Major Caldwell's actions in the survival of 9 service members." He paused again. "This board is recommending a formal reprimand to be placed in Major Caldwell's service record. It is further recommending that Major Caldwell be returned to flight status pending psychological evaluation." The room was quiet. Ferris looked up from his notes. "Major Caldwell, do you have anything to say?" Sarah looked at the board. She thought about the right answer. She thought about the professional answer and the humble answer and the politically correct answer and the answer that would best serve her interests going forward. Then she thought about Marcus Washington saying, "Tell her thank you from me." She thought about Torres saying she stayed the whole time. She thought about Miller's voice on the radio in the last moments of the mission, the voice of a man who had accepted death and then found out he was wrong. "No, sir," she said. "I have nothing to say." Ferris nodded. "This board is adjourned." People began to stand to gather papers to move. The room started to become a room again instead of a proceeding. Sarah sat still for a moment. She sat still and she let the verdict land in her chest and settle. And she did the internal accounting that she always did, the honest one, that had nothing to do with what she said to other people and everything to do with what she said to herself when she was alone. Formal reprimand, return to flight status. She turned the reprimand over in her mind. It would live in her file for the rest of her career. Every promotion board would see it. Every command evaluation would include it. It was not nothing. It was a mark, and marks in a service record had weight and consequence and longevity. She sat with that for exactly as long as it took to remember what it was a mark for. Then she stood up and walked out of the conference room. Haynes was in the corridor. I was leaning against the wall in the same spot as before, but he had a fresh coffee now. And when he saw her come out, he straightened up. Well, he said, formal reprimand, return to flight status. Haynes exhaled. Could have been worse. Yes, Sarah said. It could have. You okay? She thought about the question. She thought about it genuinely, the way she thought about questions that deserve genuine answers. Ask me again in about a week, she said. He almost smiled. Fair enough. They stood in the corridor for a moment. Then Sarah said something she had not planned to say, something that came from a place she hadn't been fully aware of until it came out. Derek, she said, and the use of his first name was itself something, because in 9 months of working in proximity to each other, she had never used it. He looked at her. Last night, she said, in the operations center, you tried. He was quiet. I know you tried, she said. I was listening to the radio. I heard your voice in the background 3 times before Whitaker gave the final order. Haynes looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at her. I should have pushed harder, he said. You pushed as far as the system allowed you to push, she said, and then I pushed past it. That's how it worked. She paused. You don't need to carry what you couldn't do. You need to carry what you can do next time. He looked at her. When did you get wise, he said. Sometime around the 3rd time the military tried to convince me that flying a desk was the same as flying an airplane, she said. This time he did smile, fully. She walked away down the corridor. The morning had moved into something that was trying to be afternoon, and the base was doing what bases do, which was continuing to function regardless of what had happened the night before, because bases were built on the understanding that things happened, and the world kept moving, and the work didn't stop for drama. Trucks moved. Personnel moved. Somewhere in a hangar, mechanics were already assessing the A-10 for damage, cataloging every stress point, every stress fracture, every place where the night's work had left a mark. Sarah walked through it, and none of it felt real yet, in the way that nothing feels real in the hours after something large has happened. She had experienced this before. The combat mission decompression, the slow return of ordinary sensation after the mission state dissolved. Usually she did it alone in the hangar, sitting on the cot, letting the silence work its way back in. She was heading for the hangar when her radio crackled. She almost didn't answer it. She was technically still in a restricted communication status, pending the board's findings, which had just been delivered, and the order confining her had been contingent on the board's outcome. She answered it. Major Caldwell. Ma'am? The voice was young, slightly rough the way voices got after surgery anesthesia. This is Specialist Washington, Marcus Washington. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Captain Miller got me the number. They said the board was done, and I figured. Washington, Sarah said. She stopped walking. How are you feeling? Like I got shot, ma'am, but the good kind of shot. The kind where you wake up afterward. She almost laughed. Almost. I heard you were in surgery. Yes, ma'am. They said it went well. They said another 30 or 40 minutes, and it might have been a different conversation. I know, she said. I know that. A pause on the line. She could hear the background noise of a medical facility, the soft electronic sounds, the distant voices of staff. Mammy Washington said, I wanted to tell you something. Okay. I didn't know who you were up there. Nobody told us anything. We just heard the engines and then the cannon, and then it got quiet where it had been loud, and I thought, whatever that is, whoever that is, they showed up for us. He paused. And I wanted you to know that I knew you were there, even from the ground. I could hear you up there the whole time, and I knew you were staying, and I want you to know that I knew. Sarah stood in the middle of the pathway between the operations building and the hangar. She stood very still. She had been composed through the entire review board. She had been composed on the tarmac with Whitaker. She had been composed in the cockpit with the fuel gauge moving toward a number she did not want it to reach. She had been composed through all of it with the competence of a person who had learned that composure was a skill, something you could train, something you could deploy the way you deployed any other professional capability. But Marcus Washington's voice on the phone, 19 years old, I knew you were staying. Thank you for calling me specialist, she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. Yes, ma'am. Captain Miller said to tell you the dinner offer stands. He said to tell you he looked you up and he's already picked the restaurant. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. He said it's your call on the date. Tell him I'm flattered, Sarah said. Tell him I'll be in touch. Yes, ma'am. A pause. Ma'am. Washington. Thank you. She stood there after the call ended. The morning moved around her. Someone walked past and nodded at her and kept walking, and she nodded back, and then she was alone again in the space between one moment and the next. She had a reprimand in her file. She had her wings. She had 9 men breathing, who were breathing because she had looked at a fuel gauge that was honest about what it said, and had decided that honesty was less important than the man with the wound in his side who was 19 years old and hadn't wanted to slow anyone down. She started walking again, toward the hangar, toward the aircraft. The mechanics were already in there, and when she walked through the door, one of them looked up and saw her and said something quietly to the others, and they all stopped what they were doing for a moment. And it was not a salute, not exactly, but it was something. She walked up to the aircraft and put her hand on the fuselage. The metal was still slightly warm. Good girl, she said quietly. To the aircraft, to the machine that had answered when she asked it to. Good girl. She stood there for a long moment with her hand on the warm metal. Behind her, Sergeant Okafor appeared at her elbow. Damage assessment is done, ma'am, he said. She took some hits. Nothing structural. Everything is repairable. How long? Week, maybe 10 days. Good, Sarah said. Get her fixed. Yes, ma'am, he paused. And ma'am, the board. Reprimand, she said. Back on flight status. Okafor breathed out. Good, he said. Just that one word. The weight it carried was considerable. Sarah looked at the aircraft for another moment. Okafor. Ma'am. When she's ready, Sarah said. I want to be the first one in the cockpit. Yes, ma'am, he said. I wouldn't have it any other way. She took her hand off the fuselage. She walked to the hangar office and sat down at her desk and pulled out a blank piece of paper, and she thought for a moment about what she wanted to write. Then she picked up her pen. She wrote 2 words at the top of the page, Miller's Restaurant, and then below it a date. She folded the paper, put it in her pocket, stood up. There were 9 men alive this morning. That was the number she was going to carry, not the reprimand, not the fuel gauge, not the general's face on the tarmac in the dark. 9 men every morning from now on. 9 men. Part 4, the weight of what was written. The reprimand was filed on a Tuesday. Sarah knew because she signed the acknowledgement form on Tuesday morning at 0900 in an office that smelled like printer toner and old coffee across a desk from a personnel officer who clearly wished he was somewhere else and was doing his level best not to make eye contact with the woman sitting across from him. She signed it with a steady hand. She dated it. She pushed it back across the desk. That's everything, Major Caldwell, the personnel officer said. Thank you, she said. She stood up. She walked out. And for the next 6 days, she waited. That was the part nobody told you about. The mission was the mission. The board was the board. The reprimand was a piece of paper with her name on it, and she had signed it, and it was done. But the thing that came after all of it, the thing that filled the space where the adrenaline and the focus and the crisis had been, was just ordinary time, ordinary days in an ordinary base where she had ordinary responsibilities that had nothing to do with the Valley or Task Force Liberty or Marcus Washington's abdominal wound. She ate in the mess hall. She did her paperwork. She ran 4 miles every morning at 0530 because she always ran 4 miles every morning at 0530 because some things don't change regardless of what the week before them looked like. And she waited for the thing she knew was coming. Because in 9 years of military service, Sarah Caldwell had learned one thing about institutions that remained true regardless of branch rank or circumstance. Institutions did not like surprises. They tolerated them when they had to. They processed them through the appropriate channels. They delivered their findings and stamped their forms and filed their reprimands. And then, when all the official business was concluded, the unofficial business began, the conversations in hallways, the shift in how people looked at you, the meetings that you were not invited to anymore, or depending on which direction the wind was blowing, the opposite of all those things. She was not sure yet which direction the wind was blowing for her. She found out on Wednesday. She was coming out of the maintenance bay where she had spent 2 hours watching Okafor and his team work on the A-10, not supervising, just being present, because being present near an aircraft that was being repaired was the closest thing to flying she currently had access to, and it was better than nothing. She came out of the maintenance bay, and there was a soldier standing outside who she had never seen before, young maybe, 22, 23, with the kind of posture that said he had been standing there for a while and was determined not to look like he had been standing there for a while. "Major Caldwell," he said. "Yes." "Ma'am, I'm Corporal James Reyes. I'm with the Public Affairs Office." He held out an envelope. "I was asked to deliver this to you personally." She took it. "Who asked you? Colonel Ferris's office, ma'am?" She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the heading "Be recognized as belonging to the Public Affairs Division." And below the heading were 3 short paragraphs that she read twice before she fully processed what she was reading. The story had gotten out. Not through official channels, not through a press release or a command decision or an authorized disclosure. It had gotten out the way things always got out in the military, which was through people who knew. People who talked to people who had a friend outside the wire with a phone and a journalist contact in their address book. Someone had talked. The story that was currently circulating in 3 national news outlets and 1 major wire service was not complete. It did not have her name. It did not have Task Force Liberty's designation. It did not have operational details that hadn't been cleared for public disclosure. But it had enough. It had a general who ordered no support. It had an unauthorized aircraft. It had 9 survivors. And it had the phrase that someone had apparently used in their original account of the story, a phrase that was now the headline on 2 of the 3 outlets. "The pilot nobody sent." Sarah read the letter from Ferris's office twice, folded it, put it in her pocket. Corporal Reyes was still standing there. "Ma'am, Colonel Ferris requests that you not speak to any media representatives pending an official public affairs guidance." "I understand," Sarah said. "And ma'am," he hesitated. He was young enough that the hesitation was visible in his whole body, not just his face. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say I served with a guy who was in the valley that night. He's a friend from Basic. He texted me this morning. He said to say thank you if I ever ran into you." Another pause. He didn't know I was delivering this. It was a coincidence. Sarah looked at him. He was very young. "Tell your friend he's welcome," she said. Reyes nodded, turned to go, stopped. "Ma'am," he said without turning back around, "for what it's worth, everybody in public affairs thinks Colonel Ferris's guidance is going to be ignored pretty thoroughly." He walked away. Sarah stood there with the letter in her pocket and thought about that. She was right to think about it because by Thursday morning, it was being ignored pretty thoroughly. The story had names now. Not her name, not yet. The name it had was Captain Jake Miller, who had given an interview to a journalist he apparently knew from his hometown, a journalist who worked for a regional newspaper in Ohio that nobody outside of Central Ohio had ever heard of, and the interview had been picked up by the wire service and redistributed nationally within 6 hours of publication. Miller had been careful. He had not disclosed operational details. He had not named the pilot. He had not identified the unit beyond its general classification. But he had said in language that was precise and quiet and utterly devastating in its simplicity exactly what had happened in that valley. He said they had been told no help was coming. He said help came anyway. He said 9 men were alive because someone decided that an order to abandon them was an order worth breaking. He said he did not know the pilot's name. He said he wished he did. He said when he found out, he intended to make sure the world knew it too. The story spread the way stories spread when they contain the specific combination of elements that human beings are built to respond to. Injustice, courage, the individual against the institution, the forgotten person who showed up anyway. It spread across every platform and into every conversation, and by Thursday afternoon it had crossed the boundary from military news into general news and was sitting on the front page of feeds that normally covered politics and entertainment and sports. In the operations building, Colonel Ferris called an emergency meeting. Major Haynes was in that meeting. Whitaker was not, which had become a pattern in the days since the board. Whitaker was present in the building, present in the base, present in his role. But he was also, in a way that was not entirely explicable, beginning the process of being absent from the particular conversations that surrounded the aftermath of what had happened, and the space that his absence created was being filled by people like Ferris and Haynes, who had their own relationships with the story and their own views about how it should proceed. Ferris opened the meeting by saying that the public affairs situation had gotten out of control and he needed ideas about how to manage it. What he got instead was Haynes. Colonel Ferris, Haynes said, "With respect, I think the question of whether to manage it and the question of how to manage it are two separate questions, and we should be clear about which one we're actually discussing." Ferris looked at him. "What's the distinction?" "The distinction is that managing it implies there is something here that needs to be contained," Haynes said, "and I would suggest that the story that is currently circulating is accurate. 9 soldiers are alive. They were ordered to be abandoned. They were not abandoned because one person decided not to follow that order. If we attempt to manage that story by suppressing it or redirecting it or shaping it into something more comfortable for the institution, we are going to fail and we are going to look like we are trying to hide something that the public is already correctly identifying as a problem." Silence in the room. Ferris looked at him for a long moment. "What are you recommending, Major?" "I'm recommending," Haynes said carefully, "that we think very seriously about what the story looks like if we get ahead of it versus what it looks like if it gets ahead of us." More silence. Then one of the other officers in the room, a lieutenant colonel named Briggs, who Sarah had met exactly once, and who Haynes had described to her in passing as someone whose instinct for institutional survival was extremely well developed, said something that nobody expected. "He's right," Briggs said. "Ferris, he's right. If this comes out with us looking like we were trying to sit on it, it's catastrophically worse than whatever the current version is." Ferris looked around the room. Every face he looked at told him the same thing. He picked up his pen and wrote something on his notepad and put the pen back down and said, "I need to speak to General Whitaker." The meeting ended. Haynes walked out of the meeting and went directly to the one place he thought Sarah might be, which was the maintenance bay. And she was not there, but Okafor told him she had been there an hour ago and had probably gone back to Hangar 7, and Haynes went to Hangar 7 and found her exactly where Okafor had suggested, sitting on her cot with her back against the wall and a notepad on her knee. "There's a meeting happening," Haynes said. "I know," Sarah said. "Reyes told me about the letter Thursday morning. I've been watching the news coverage since Wednesday." "How are you feeling about it?" She looked at the notepad for a moment. "Ask me something I can answer." He sat down in the chair that was 3 feet from her cot. "They're going to have to make a decision about whether to get ahead of the story or let it run. And I think they're going to get ahead of it," he said. "I think Ferris is going to take it to Whitaker this afternoon, and I think Whitaker is going to do the thing that's strategically correct, which is to come out in front of this before the story names you and the institution is stuck reacting instead of leading." Sarah thought about that. "Which means what for me specifically?" "Which means," Haynes said carefully, "that there is a version of this where you end up in front of a camera with a general standing next to you and someone handing you something that partially offsets a formal reprimand that is currently sitting in your service record." The room was quiet for a moment. "Derek," she said, "yeah, I did not fly that mission for a camera. I know you didn't. And I did not fly it for something to offset a reprimand. I know that too. So if what they're considering is using me as a..." She stopped, started again. "If what they're considering is turning what happened into a story that makes the institution look good, while the institution still has a formal reprimand in the file of the person who made it look good, then I have some significant reservations about participating in that story." Haynes was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. "Sarah, the reprimand." "Yes. Whitaker is moving to have it expunged." She went very still. "When," she said, "the paperwork went to personnel this morning, before the public affairs meeting, before any of the story conversations. He did it this morning at Bureau 700, which is before the story was on the front page of anything national, which is before anyone had told him to do it for strategic reasons." Haynes paused. "He did it because he decided to do it, on his own." Sarah sat with that. She sat with it for a long time. Haynes did not push her. He had learned in the last several days that Sarah Caldwell processed things in the way that people who feel things deeply process things, which is quietly and completely, and without requiring an audience for the process. Finally, she said, "That doesn't change what he did that night." "No," Haynes said, "it doesn't. 9 men almost died because of the order he gave." "Yes. One of them is still in a hospital bed. Washington is doing well, actually. I got an update this morning. He's been moved out of post-op. They think he'll be discharged from medical in about 3 weeks." Something in Sarah's face moved. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Haynes confirmed. She looked at the notepad on her knee. She had been writing something when he came in, and she had closed the notepad when he sat down, and he had not asked about it. "What are you going to do?" he said. "I don't know yet." "That's fair." "I need to think about what it means," she said. "To stand next to a man who ordered those soldiers abandoned and have someone take a photograph. What that says, what it doesn't say, whether the thing it communicates is worth the thing it costs." Haynes nodded. He understood the question. He had a version of the same question in his own head, smaller because he was not the person at the center of it, but present. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think the thing that matters most is not the photograph. I think the thing that matters most is the expungement and what it represents, which is a man in a position of authority, acknowledging publicly and in the official record that he was wrong and that you were right. In the military, in the institution we both serve, that is extremely rare, and I think it matters." Sarah looked at him. "You've thought about this a lot," she said. "I've been awake since Tuesday," he said. "I've had time." She opened her notepad again. He stood up to leave. "Derek," she said. He stopped. "What you said to him in the corridor, after the board, I heard about it." He turned around. "That took something," she said. "Saying that to him directly, that took something." He shrugged slightly. "Not really. He was already doing the right thing by the time I said it." "It still took something," she said. "I know how hard it is to say the right thing to someone who has the power to decide what happens to your career." He looked at her. They both understood what she meant by that. "Get some sleep," he said. "You look terrible." "You look worse," she said. He left. She turned back to her notepad. The Friday meeting with Whitaker happened in his office, which was not how Sarah had expected it. She had expected a neutral space, a conference room, something that communicated distance and official formality. Instead, she was shown into the general's personal office by an aide who knocked once, opened the door, and left without saying anything. Whitaker was behind his desk. He stood up when she came in. That was the first thing. He stood up. "Major Caldwell," he said, "please sit down." She sat. He sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and Sarah was aware of the silence in the way you're aware of silence in a room where something heavy is about to happen. "I assume Major Haynes told you about the expungement," Whitaker said. "Yes, sir. I want you to understand that it was not done for strategic reasons." "Major Haynes indicated that, sir." "I'm telling you directly so there's no ambiguity." He looked at her steadily. "The reprimand should not have been issued. The order should not have been given. Those two facts are connected. The reprimand exists because of the order, and the order was wrong, and therefore the reprimand was wrong. That is the reasoning. It is not more complicated than that." Sarah said nothing. "I also want you to know," Whitaker continued, "that what I said in the boardroom was the first time in 22 years of service that I have walked into an official proceeding and placed my own error on the record voluntarily." He paused. "I am not telling you that because I want credit for it. I am telling you because I think you deserve to know that it was not easy, and that the fact that it was not easy does not mean it should not have been done. I should have done it years ago in other situations. I did not. This time I did." Sarah looked at him. "Sir," she said carefully, "what are you asking me?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "That's not why you're here. You're here because I wanted to say these things to you in person rather than through channels or aides or official correspondence." He paused again. "And because there is going to be a public moment in the next 72 hours, a statement from this command that will address what happened in that valley. I wanted you to hear from me before you heard from public affairs what that statement is going to contain." "What is it going to contain?" Sarah said. Whitaker looked at her. "Your name," he said. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room completely edge to edge. "My name," she said. "Your name, your rank, your role in the operation." A full account of what you did and why, including the fuel state and the decision to remain on station. And a formal acknowledgement from this command that the initial order depriving Task Force Liberty of air support was an error in judgment that contributed to a situation requiring extraordinary action. He paused. The statement will not say I was wrong in those words, but anyone who reads it will understand that I was wrong. Sarah sat very still. Why, she said, not challenging, genuinely asking. The why of it was the thing she had not been able to work out from the outside, and she needed to work it out. Whitaker looked away for a moment, then back. I have a son, he said, 20 years old. I told you that on the tarmac. Yes, sir. He called me Thursday morning. He had seen the story. He didn't know I was involved. He called me because he wanted to tell me about it because it made him angry. He said, Dad, can you believe there are commanders who would do that, who would give an order like that? He stopped. He talked for 4 minutes. I did not say anything. When he was done, I told him I loved him and I would call him back. He was quiet for a moment. I have not called him back yet. Sarah said nothing. I will, Whitaker said, but I needed to do this first. She sat with that for a long time. Then she said something she had not planned to say, something that came from a place deeper than strategy or politics or career calculation. Sir, she said, for what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad man. He looked at her. I think you made a bad decision, she said. I think you made it for reasons that made sense to you in the moment and that you believed were in the interest of the broader mission. I think the information you had was incomplete and the pressure you were under was real, and the decision-making environment was not designed for the kind of nuance that situation required. She paused. And I think none of that changes what almost happened to those men. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Whitaker was quiet. I am going to carry what I did, he said. I know, she said. So am I. What are you going to carry, he said. You saved 9 lives. I'm going to carry the version where I didn't make it back, she said. The fuel calculation, the version where I stayed too long and the aircraft went down and there was nobody in the sky for those men in the last 8 minutes before extraction. I'm going to carry that version because it was real. It was a real possibility. And I'm going to carry it because it keeps me honest about what it costs to stay. Whitaker looked at her for a long time. Major Caldwell, he said, I have served with a lot of pilots. She waited. There are not many like you, he said. I know that, sir, she said. And the way she said it was not arrogance. It was just honesty, the same honesty she had brought to every other part of the conversation. The same honesty that had characterized every decision she had made since the night she climbed into the cockpit of an aircraft covered in dust and flew toward a valley she had been told to leave alone. She stood up. Whitaker stood up. She extended her hand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it. It was not a military handshake. It was something else, something more human than rank and less complicated than forgiveness. Thank you for coming in, he said. Thank you for calling me, she said. She walked out of his office. The aide in the anteroom did not look up as she passed. She walked down the corridor and out of the operations building and into the afternoon, and the afternoon was ordinary in the way that all afternoons are ordinary. And she walked through it feeling the weight of the last 6 days settling into something she could actually carry, something that had shape and dimension and a beginning and an end. Unlike the shapeless weight of the days before the mission, when she was sitting in a hangar alone, wondering if the aircraft and the pilot and the moment would ever line up again. They had lined up. She had flown, and now she was walking into an afternoon that was ordinary and carrying a weight that was real, and knowing that in 72 hours her name was going to be in a public statement from a military command that had spent years making her feel like a pilot whose story was finished. The story was not finished. It had never been finished. It had only been waiting for the right night, in the right valley, and the right 9 men who needed someone in the sky. She walked back toward the hangar. Okafor was outside when she arrived, and he saw her coming, and he said nothing for a moment, and then he said the only thing that needed to be said. She's almost ready, ma'am. Sarah looked at the hangar. She looked at the aircraft inside it. How long, she said. 2 days, Okafor said. Maybe less. Good, what she said. She walked inside. She ran her hand along the fuselage the way she always did. The checking gesture, the greeting, the physical conversation between a pilot in her aircraft that existed outside of language. The metal was cool, getting warmer. 2 days. She could wait 2 days. Part 5, the name they could never erase. The statement went out on a Sunday. Not a Friday, which was when institutions released things they wanted to quietly disappear into the weekend news cycle. Not a Monday, which was when they released things they wanted taken seriously by the morning news programs. A Sunday, which was its own kind of choice, the choice of something that needed time to breathe before the week's machinery caught up with it. Sarah ratted on her phone at 0610, sitting on her cot in Hangar 7, still in the clothes she had slept in, which was not a habit she was proud of, but which had become the default setting of the last several days when sleep came in short, unpredictable windows that she took wherever she found them. The statement was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph described the operation in general terms. The second paragraph described the role of an unnamed pilot in the survival of Task Force Liberty's 9 personnel. The third paragraph was the one she read 3 times. It said, "This command acknowledges that the initial decision to withhold air support from Task Force Liberty was made with incomplete situational awareness and resulted in a level of risk to American personnel that was not consistent with the standards this command holds itself to. The pilot's decision to act while outside the bounds of authorized channels was consistent with the highest traditions of military service and directly resulted in the preservation of American lives. Major Sarah Caldwell acted with extraordinary courage under circumstances that demanded more than the system had authorized her to give. This command is grateful that she gave it anyway." Her name, right there in the third paragraph, Major Sarah Caldwell. She sat on the cot and read her name in an official military statement and felt something move through her that she did not immediately have a word for. It was not pride exactly. It was something older than pride and quieter than pride, something closer to the feeling of being seen after a long time of being invisible, of being named after a long time of being unnamed, of having the thing you knew to be true about yourself confirmed in writing by the institution that had spent years suggesting the opposite. She put the phone down and she sat very still. Then she picked the phone back up and called Miller. He answered on the second ring. "You saw it," he said, not a question. "I saw it," she said. "Your name's in it." "I noticed." Third paragraph, he said. "I read it 4 times." "Me too," she said. A pause. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. She had gotten to know the quality of his silences over the last several days, the different things his pauses communicated. This one communicated the kind of fullness that happens when a person has things to say but is not yet sure which of those things belong in the conversation and which ones belong somewhere more private. "Sarah," he said. He had started using her first name 3 days ago. She had not corrected him. "Yeah. How are you?" She thought about it. "I think I'm okay," she said. "I think I need a few more hours before I can be certain." "That's fair," he said. "Listen, Torres called me this morning, before the statement. He said to tell you he's been talking to his kids about you. He has 3 kids, did you know that? 8, 10, and 12. He said the 12-year-old wants to be a pilot now." Something tightened in Sarah's chest. "Tell him to study math," she said. "You cannot fly without math." Miller laughed. A real laugh, full and sudden, the laugh of a man who has had too little to laugh at in recent days and is grateful for any excuse. "I'll tell him. He'll love that." "How is Washington?" she said. "Doing better every day. He's annoyed about the food. He's texting everyone on the team complaining about hospital food, which I'm taking as a very positive sign." "It is a very positive sign," she said. Another pause, different quality. This one had something decided in it. "The restaurant," Miller said. "Miller. I made a reservation," he said. "I am not a man who makes threats he doesn't follow through on. Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock. I sent the details to Haynes because I didn't have your direct contact and I figured Haynes would get it to you." "Haynes hasn't told me anything about a reservation." "Then Haynes is going to hear from me shortly." Sarah leaned her head back against the wall. "Miller, I'm not sure a dinner is the right—" "It's not about what's right," he said. "It's about what's owed. I owe you a dinner. Torres owes you a dinner. Cho owes you a dinner and has specifically asked me to tell you that he intends to apologize in person for the complete breakdown in military composure he experienced during the engagement, by which he means the laughing. Tell Cho there is nothing to apologize for. I know that, and you know that. Cho is 22, and he's going to need to say it to your face before he can let it go." A pause. Wednesday, Sarah, 7 o'clock. All 9 of us are going to be there. Washington is being released from medical on Tuesday. She sat with that. 9 men, all 9. Wednesday at 7 o'clock in a restaurant she had not yet been told the name of. Okay, she said. Yeah, Wednesday, she said, 7 o'clock. Good, Miller said, and the word carried in it everything that a single syllable could carry when it was spoken by someone who had been in a valley with an empty sky and had lived to make a dinner reservation. She hung up. She looked at the phone for a moment. Then she got up off the cot and went to find Okafor. I was in the maintenance bay as he always was in the early mornings, and when she walked in, he looked up from whatever he was doing, and she saw on his face that he had already seen the statement. Ma'am, he said. How is she, Sarah said. Ready, he said. As of about 20 minutes ago, she passed full systems check. She is cleared to fly. Sarah stood very still. You're sure? I would not tell you she was ready if she wasn't ready, ma'am, Okafor said with the particular dignity of a man whose professional standards are not something he considers negotiable. She is ready. Sarah walked past him to the aircraft. She put her hand on the fuselage. The metal was cool and solid and entirely present under her palm. Okay, she said quietly. Just to the aircraft. Just between the two of them. Okay, let's do this right. She climbed up. She ran the full checklist. Every item, every system, every check that could be done on the ground before a pilot trusts an aircraft with her life and the lives of the people who depend on what that aircraft can do. She ran all of it slowly, completely, without skipping anything the way she had run it 100 times before, and the way she would run it every time after this one, because the day you start skipping items on a checklist is the day the checklist stops being a checklist and starts being a suggestion. And Sarah Caldwell had never in her life been interested in suggestions. When the checklist was complete, she sat in the cockpit for a moment. She was not on a mission. There was nowhere to go and nothing to engage and no valley full of soldiers who needed someone in the sky. It was a Sunday morning on a military base, and the world was doing what the world does on Sunday mornings, which is move a little slower than it does on other days and allow things a little more space. She sat in the cockpit and she let herself be there. Just there. Just the cockpit and the instruments and the smell of the aircraft and the sense of her own body and the seat that fit her the way good seats fit the people they were made for. She had been a pilot for 9 years. She had flown in conditions that required more than she thought she had. She had been told the story was over and had discovered that the people telling her that were wrong. She sat in the cockpit of the repaired A-10 on a Sunday morning, and she let herself feel the full weight of what the last 10 days had been, and she let it move through her the way things move through you when you finally stop holding them at arm's length, and she felt all of it. The night in the valley and the fuel gauge and the Western Ravine Pass and Washington's voice on the phone and Whitaker's handshake and Miller's laugh and the third paragraph of the statement with her name in it. She felt all of it, and then she let it settle, because that was what you did with the things you carried. You felt them fully, and then you let them settle into the part of you that was built to hold them, and then you got back to work. She climbed down from the cockpit. Okafor was waiting at the base of the ladder. Well, he said. She's perfect, Sarah said. He smiled. The full version of it that she had not seen from him before. The real one. Yes, ma'am, he said. She is. The call came on Monday. She was in the middle of a routine administrative task, the kind of task that was so thoroughly ordinary that she had to check the date twice to confirm it had only been 10 days since the operation, when her phone rang with a number she did not recognize, and she answered it out of the habit of someone who had learned never to let unknown numbers go to voicemail when you are in the middle of something that might still be generating consequences. Major Caldwell, said the voice on the other end. It was a woman's voice, professional with the particular measured quality of someone who makes calls like this regularly and has learned to front-load the important information. This is Colonel Patricia Vance, Pentagon Liaison to the Chief of Staff's office. I apologize for reaching you directly rather than through your chain of command. We've had some difficulty identifying the correct routing. Sarah put down what she was doing. Colonel Vance, she said, how can I help you? Major, the Chief of Staff's office has been following the developments of the past week. I've been asked to reach out to you directly to communicate that the Chief would like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. He is available Thursday. Sarah was quiet for 3 full seconds. The Chief of Staff, she said. Yes, ma'am. Of the Air Force. Yes, ma'am. Another 3 seconds. Can I ask what the nature of the meeting is? Sarah said. Major Vance said with the tone of someone who has been told exactly how much to say and is choosing her words accordingly. I can tell you that it is not disciplinary in nature. I can also tell you that the chief has read both the after-action summary and the official statement from your command, and that he has read them more than once. A pause. Beyond that, I think the meeting itself will communicate more than I can appropriately convey in advance. Sarah sat with that. Thursday, she said. Thursday, we can arrange transport if needed. No, Sarah said. I'll arrange my own transport. Can you send me the meeting details through official channels? I want it in writing. Of course, Major. You'll have it within the hour. Thank you, Colonel Vance. She hung up. She sat at her desk for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Haynes. He answered immediately. I heard, he said. How did you already hear? Vance called Ferris after she called you. Ferris called me. I was literally about to call you. A pause. Thursday. Thursday, she confirmed. Sarah. His voice had changed. The professional tone was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, something warmer and less controlled. Do you understand what this means? I'm starting to understand what it might mean, she said carefully. I don't want to assume. The Chief of Staff does not personally request meetings with majors to discuss administrative matters, Haynes said. He does not read after-action summaries more than once, unless those summaries are going to inform a decision he is about to make. She was quiet. Whatever he is about to offer you, Haynes said, you should take it. You don't know what it is yet. I know enough, he said. Sarah, you have been flying a desk for 3 years. You have been keeping a dusty A-10 mission ready in a hangar that was supposed to be closed down by yourself for no reason other than the fact that you could not let yourself stop being a pilot. You did not stop being a pilot. You were never a pilot who was finished. You were always a pilot who was waiting for the institution to remember what it had. She said nothing for a long moment. I'll call you Thursday night, she said. I'll be awake, he said. I'll be awake the whole time. Tuesday came, and with it, Marcus Washington's discharge from medical. The call she got was not from Washington himself, but from Miller, who called her at 1400 to tell her that Washington had walked out of the medical facility under his own power at 11:30, which the doctors had described as ahead of schedule, and which Washington had apparently described as finally, and that Torres had driven him to the temporary quarters they had arranged for the team, and that Washington had gone directly from the car to the shower, and from the shower to a meal that he described in a series of texts to the group as the greatest thing that has ever happened to me, and I would like to personally apologize to every salad I have ever failed to appreciate. Sarah laughed when Miller read her the texts. A real laugh, the kind that comes from the chest. He's going to be okay, she said. He's going to be great, Miller said. He already told me he's re-enlisting. I asked him why, and he said because I'm not done yet. She held the phone. That sounds familiar, she said. It does, Miller said. It sounds exactly like someone else I know. Wednesday at 7 o'clock, she walked into a restaurant in a city 15 miles from the base. She was not late, and she was not early. She was exactly on time because Sarah Caldwell was always exactly on time, and she walked through the door, and the hostess looked up and then looked past her to the table in the back, where 9 men were already seated, and the hostess said, "Are you the 10th?" And Sarah said yes. And the hostess smiled at her with the particular warmth of someone who has observed from a distance what kind of gathering this was and has decided it deserves something extra. She walked to the table. The moment she came through the door from the reception area into the dining room, Miller saw her first. He stood up, and then every other man at the table stood up, not in a synchronized way, not in a rehearsed way, in the way people stand up when something important has arrived that they have been waiting for and the body responds before the mind has finished deciding. All 9 of them standing. For a moment, she stopped walking. She stopped walking and she looked at them. 9 faces looking back at her. 9 men who had been in a valley 10 days ago counting ammunition and waiting for an empty sky to fill with something other than enemy fire, and she felt the thing again. The thing she had felt, reading her name in the statement, the thing she did not have a precise word for. Being seen. Being fully, completely, undeniably seen. She kept walking. Miller came around the table and extended his hand, and she shook it, and then he did something she had not expected, which was that he kept holding her hand for an extra moment and looked at her directly and said without any military framing, without rank or formality, Just one human being to another, thank you. For all of it. For staying. She held his gaze. I wouldn't have left, she said. He nodded once. He let go of her hand. She sat down. Torres was directly across from her. His arm was in a proper sling now, the kind that came from a medical facility rather than a field dressing. He looked at her for a moment and then said, for the record, ma'am, I told everyone in this room from the beginning that you were going to come back. You did not know I was there until you heard the engines, she said. I knew someone was coming, Torres said with absolute confidence. I told them someone was coming. You told us to shut up and keep shooting, Cho said from 2 seats down. That is also coming, Torres said. I multitask. The table laughed. It was the sound of 9 men laughing who had earned the right to laugh, who had been through something that not all of them had fully processed yet and would not fully process for months or possibly years, and who were sitting at a dinner table on a Wednesday evening and choosing consciously and deliberately to let this moment be a good one. Washington was at the far end of the table. He looked thinner than she had imagined him. She had built a picture of him in her mind, from the voice on the phone, from what Miller had told her, and the picture was not wrong exactly, but it was incomplete in the way that all pictures built from information are incomplete. He was young, not young in the abstract way of someone who is younger than you, but young in a specific and tangible way, in the way of someone whose face still has the quality of someone who has not yet fully hardened into the person they are going to become. He met her eyes across the table. He did not say thank you. He just looked at her for a moment with an expression that communicated something that existed beyond what thank you could contain. She nodded at him. He nodded back. That was enough. That was more than enough. They ordered food and they talked, and the conversation moved the way conversations move at dinners, like this one, through the surface things and into the real things, and then back to the surface again. And Sarah learned that Ramirez was getting married in April, and Gwen was applying to graduate school in engineering. And Chen was thinking about becoming a medic. And she told them about the first time she had ever flown an A-10, which was not a proud story, which involved a mistake she had made on a training exercise that her instructor had described. Using language she was not going to repeat at a dinner table, and the table laughed again, and the dinner was 2 hours long and felt like 20 minutes. At the end of it, when the table was clearing and the conversation was winding into the comfortable, quieter register of things nearing their conclusion, Washington appeared at her elbow. She had not seen him move from his seat. He was standing there slightly careful in the way of someone whose body is still reminding him of what it recently went through, and he had something in his hand. He held it out to her. It was a small piece of paper folded once. I wrote this in the hospital, he said, and the second day, I had a lot of time and not a lot to do. He paused. You don't have to read it now, or ever if you don't want to. I just wanted you to have it. She took it. She looked at him. Thank you, Marcus, she said. His jaw moved. He was 19 years old and he was working very hard to maintain composure, which she recognized because she had spent 10 days doing the same thing. No, ma'am, he said, thank you. I went back to his seat. She folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket. She read it later that night, sitting on her cot in Hangar 7. The aircraft 20 feet away in the dark, the base quiet around her. The handwriting was careful and slightly uneven, the handwriting of someone writing while still in a hospital bed. It said, I don't know how to say this the right way, so I'm just going to say it. I was scared that night in a way I hadn't been before. Not scared of dying exactly. Scared of dying without anyone knowing I was there. That sounds strange, but it's true. And then I heard the engines and I knew someone knew we were there. Someone came. Whatever happens after that night for the rest of my life, I am going to remember that sound. I am going to remember that someone came. Thank you for being that someone, Washington. She folded the letter. She held it in both hands for a moment. Outside, a wind came up and moved through the hangar the way wind moves through large, empty spaces, touching everything lightly and belonging to nothing. Thursday. The Chief of Staff's office was exactly what you would expect an office of that significance to be, which meant it was larger than it needed to be and decorated with a particular combination of military precision and institutional solemnity that communicated authority without requiring anyone to say the word authority out loud. General Raymond Cross was 61 years old and had the physical presence of someone who had spent 4 decades making rooms take him seriously without having to try. He stood up when Sarah came in, which was the second time in 10 days that a general had stood up for her, and she filed that fact away somewhere. He shook her hand. He gestured to a chair. He sat. Major Caldwell, he said. General Cross, she said. I'm going to skip the preamble, he said, because I suspect you are not a person who benefits from preamble, and because what I have to say is fairly direct and becomes less direct with every sentence I add around it. I appreciate that, sir, she said. I have read everything there is to read about what happened 10 days ago, he said. The radio logs, the radar records, the board transcript, General Whitaker's statement, Captain Miller's interview, and your own written account, which is the most precise piece of writing I have read in this office in 6 months. He paused. I have also read your full service record, all of it, including the classified mission from 3 years ago that resulted in your reassignment. Sarah's expression did not change. I am aware of that mission, sir, she said. I know you are, he said. What you may not be aware of is that I am also aware of how that reassignment decision was made, and by whom, and on the basis of what reasoning, and that I have a view about that reasoning that I will describe as not favorable. She was very still. Major, he said, I am going to ask you a direct question, and I would like a direct answer. Yes, sir. Do you want to fly? She looked at him. The question was so simple and so complete and so far past all of the institutional language and official framing and careful professional positioning that had surrounded every conversation of the last 10 days that for a moment she almost did not know how to respond to it. Yes, sir, she said. More than anything. He nodded. Then here's what I am going to offer you, Ben, he said. There is a squadron currently being reconstituted at Davis-Monthan. A-10s, experienced pilots, but we are short, a flight leader with a specific combination of close air support experience and low-altitude combat time that this mission profile requires. He looked at her steadily. The assignment would restore your full flight status, upgrade your designation, and come with a promotion to lieutenant colonel that has been pending in your file for 14 months. The room was extremely quiet. The reprimand has been expunged, he continued. Your record is clean. The assignment is yours if you want it. He paused. I will also tell you that 3 members of the Senate Armed Services Committee have been briefed on your actions in the Valley and have expressed interest in ensuring that your situation receives appropriate recognition. That process will take time, but it is in motion. Sarah sat across from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and felt the full weight of what she was being offered land on her, the way heavy things land when they have been a long time in falling. Everything she had lost returned, not as a gift, not as charity, as a correction, as the institution finding the mistake it had buried and choosing 10 days after a valley in Afghanistan made that mistake impossible to ignore to fix it. Sir, she said, her voice was steady. She made it steady. Can I ask you something? Of course. If the operation had gone differently, she said, if I had launched and the aircraft had not performed, if I had gone down in the valley, if the outcome had been different, she paused, would we be having this conversation? He looked at her. He did not look away. No, he said, we would not. She sat with that honesty. She respected it more than any version of this conversation that pretended otherwise would have deserved. I understand that, sir, she said. I am going to accept the assignment. Good, he said. I have one request. He waited. Sergeant Raymond Okafor, she said. He is currently assigned to maintenance at the base. I would like him assigned to Davis-Monthan as part of the squadron ground crew. Cross looked at her. The mechanic who didn't call it in when you launched, he said. Yes, sir. Any particular reason? Because he made a decision that night, she said. And he made it for the right reasons. And people who make decisions for the right reasons are the people I want working on my aircraft. Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. Done, he said. She flew home that afternoon. Not in an A-10, in a transport, a practical and thoroughly unglamorous way to travel the kind of flight that exists purely as the mechanism of getting from one place to another and offers nothing in the way of the thing that made flying meaningful to her. She sat in the transport and watched the ground below and thought about Davis-Monthan in the squadron, in the assignment, and she thought about what it meant to be going back to the work she was built for with a rank that reflected what she had always been capable of and a record that was finally clean. She thought about the night in the valley. She thought about the fuel gauge. She thought about Washington's letter. Someone came. The transport landed and she walked off the tarmac and went to Hangar 7, and Okafor was there, and she told him what was happening, and she watched his face as the information arrived, and the expression that moved across it was something she was not going to describe to anyone because it belonged to him and was not hers to narrate. Davis Monthan, he said. Davis and Monthan, she confirmed. A-10s, he said. A squadron of them. He looked at her. When do we leave? He said. 2 weeks, she said. He turned back to the workbench. He picked up a tool. He set it back down. He turned around again. Ma'am, he said, for what it's worth, my brother is going to think this is the greatest thing that has ever happened. Sarah smiled, the real version of it. Tell him I said welcome to the family, she said. Later that night, she called Miller. Davis Monthan, she told him. He was quiet for 2 full seconds. Lieutenant Colonel Caldwell, he said. Not yet, she said. Not yet, he agreed, but soon. Yes, she said. Soon. She hung up. She sat in Hangar 7 one last time on the cot in the quiet with the aircraft in the dark 20 feet away. She thought about all the versions of this story that could have existed. The version where she didn't turn on the radio that night. The version where she heard the transmission and stayed on the cot. The version where she got to the cockpit and the aircraft didn't start. The version where the fuel ran out over the valley and the aircraft went down, and Washington died before the extraction arrived and the story ended. Not with a dinner and a Thursday meeting in Washington, but with a telegram and a folded flag and a silence that would have lived in 9 families for the rest of their lives. All those other versions, she had lived this one instead. She looked at the aircraft. We did good, she said, quietly, just the 2 of them. Then she lay back on the cot and closed her eyes. And Major Sarah Caldwell, who would be Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Caldwell in less than a month, who had been told her story was finished and had proven with every decision of the last 10 days that stories do not end until the people living in them decide they are done, slept soundly in the hangar that had been her home through the long months of waiting with the aircraft that had carried her back into the fight, resting in the dark beside her and outside the walls of that hangar. Base moved and breathed the way bases do, and somewhere in a hospital room, a 19-year-old soldier was texting complaints about food to 8 men who would spend the rest of their lives counting her among the reasons they were alive to receive them. Some battles are not won by the largest army or the most advanced technology or the most strategically brilliant command decision. Some battles are won by one person who heard the word no and understood it to mean not yet. Major Sarah Caldwell had always understood that, and now at last so did everyone else.